sleep at night?
It's just been so hot. Like,
Mhm.
so like it doesn't cool off until I don't know, like 12 o'clock at night. And then then it takes a while for the house to cool down. Um, and cause it like, we have a system to deal with the heat, but it's been tough because it's been so hot so late into the evenings. Like we get in bed at like 8:15, and then I can't even open a window yet because it's still 88 degrees, 90 degrees out. And that definitely affects my sleep quality. Like I'm a cold sleeper, so like this whole week, um, it's just been getting gradually warmer inside the house, and it's been hard to cool it off. But like last night, yeah, I felt like I got good quality last night. And even I had a terrible cup of coffee this morning, but I still feel like pretty good. Um,
You know, what's funny
yeah,
is we keep talking about this, and I'm just like shocked at how you and Zoe are able to deal with that. My wife Alicia, she is just like hot natured, generally speaking. So we usually keep our house pretty cool. But now that she's like 34, 35 weeks pregnant, she's like, you can put blankets on. Brady can put blankets on. Y'all wear extra clothes. Do what you got to do. Like this house is going to be 66 degrees. So good luck.
yeah,
Like, oh my God.
yep. Oh man, yeah, we were like thinking about getting a like some kind of AC unit or something, but we're moving in a month, so and our new place is gonna have air conditioning, which seems to be a necessity now if it's gonna be 90 in the beginning of June in Colorado, which is just like unprecedented. Um,
Yeah. I
but
know
the
that a lot of places are dealing with kind of, I don't want to say like unprecedented heat, although that's probably the case, but just like it seems like everywhere, all over the place, got hot fast. Um, with like, I don't know about Colorado, but we haven't had rain in Arkansas in like 2 weeks now. And it's been, between 90 and 95 degrees every day with
uh,
humidity on top of that. So it feels like 105 ish every day. And it's like, wow, that was fast. Next week, I think we get a little rain and the temperatures drop down back into like the high 70s, low 80s. But these last 2 weeks, training, like I see it in my logs from all the athletes everywhere. Just everyone has been melting the last 2 weeks.
yeah, oh yeah, everybody. I think the upside to this is that like uh can you get in here? I feel like we're at a weird angle. um yeah, I think the upside to all of this is like at least here, in Colorado, like we have to run in the summer. We're running a lot of runs at elevation, right? So like we live at 6,000 feet. But I think most of the runs that we've done, long runs that we've done in the last 3 weeks, have been at 9,000 feet average, and with considerable amounts of time at like 10 and 11,000 feet. And so, it's hot. Our runs are hot. Like I did a run on Wednesday afternoon, and it was 96 degrees. Um, the benefit to this is like your blood plasma levels are going through the roof. And so when you finally get up into the mountains, you're going to be that much fitter and more adapted to the altitude because your blood volume is higher. So like as much as it's like a bit of a challenge, I think like Zoe and I both like all week have been scrambling to make sure that we get out the door to go do our runs early, because here it's like the sun exposure is really rough. So if it's like 80 degrees during the run, but there's zero shade, it's full exposure, that can easily feel like a lot more. Um, and definitely like affects your perceived effort and whatnot out there. So like for us, like we try to get out there early. The benefit is that, like when we go up to the mountains, like we're leaving to go camping in a couple hours. Um, like when we spend the weekend in the mountains, it's going to feel that much better because we've done some of that work already. And I think normally, in the summer, I don't really feel good at elevation or with the heat until, August or September. And then like the season's over, because sometimes it just takes like that long for it to really warm up here. So I think that this could be a benefit athletically. And so I'm trying to keep a positive mindset to it, even though like, yeah, like we've had some rough nights of sleep
Yeah, I
and
mean,
some
if
tough workouts,
you
but
know, I was worried because like we've definitely had athletes repeat races they've done previously and it's been hotter and that's hurt performance. But some of those same races, you're also seeing course records falling, which I think indicates that if you're prepared and if you're putting in the work, like you can have breakthrough races still. Like heat doesn't have to be a performance limiter. But that is
yeah,
to say that you do have to go slow and like adjust.
I think so too, right? And you have to have had like 2 or 3 weeks of pretty significant heat exposure, I think, to go out and crush a race
Yeah.
in hot temperatures.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, that's anybody, no matter how fit you are, you're gonna feel those temps
Yeah,
if
I
you're
think
not used to them. Like it's about building a tolerance as much as it is about, you know, building the blood volume and being able to keep your skin cool and things like that, being able to sweat out less sodium. You know, those are some of the efficiencies that happen as you adapt to the heat. But you know, it's also about just being like just more tolerant to it. And so like you can't get more tolerant to the heat unless you're out there in the heat.
yeah.
Yeah. And being out there in the heat is rough. Like it's sometimes these I had a long run like 2 Saturdays ago, and it was like one of those days that you really just want to avoid it, right? In your training, like you don't want to go to the mental well to finish a long run, because that taxes you. That can make you more tired for the rest of your training block. It's something that you want to reserve really for race day. But sometimes the heat will do that, you know. So you have to just kind of give yourself some grace, take that with a grain of salt, and remember to take some extra salt, take some extra electrolytes, um, just go slower. You know, I think I've seen a lot of athletes having issues adjusting to the heat because they're not adjusting their expectations, and
Mm,
that's really really
yeah.
challenging.
Don't use this as an opportunity to practice negative self talk. That does not help your blood plasma. It is not helpful for your training to tell yourself that you're a slow piece of crap when that's just like your body experiencing science, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, don't be hard on yourself because of physics.
Oh gosh, and also just know like you're not
We're
gonna
all
sit.
slowing down.
Yeah, and
Every
you're.
single person on the team. If someone's not slowing down, then I'm suspecting that like I don't know, something else is going on.
I think that it's important too for people to realize like, hey, your long runs aren't about like smashing a PR, nailing any segments,
Mm-mm.
like grabbing crowns out there or whatever. Like it's all about actually just going slow and building fitness. So you don't have to try to prove
Yeah.
yourself on these long runs. Which you know, I preach this a lot, but I see it a lot with athletes, especially athletes who are newer to the program. And I certainly was like this, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, where I used to want to run my long runs like I would run my race efforts. And that's
Mm.
not, you know, a recipe for success. You have to just slow it down. Remember you're building fitness, especially in the heat, especially if you're at altitude. You know, just relax, like mentally get into a space where you're like, you know, I'm just gonna like be out here for 3.5 hours, and that's cool. I've got like some good tunes. I've got an audiobook. Like this is a beautiful place to be. Maybe I won't even listen to music. I'll just listen to my breath and just like settle in to the effort and build those adaptations rather than to be like, I need to crush this loop as fast as I can. This is how I prove that like my workouts are actually doing something for me. That attitude, the sustainability behind that as an athlete, like both mentally and physically, there's not a lot of sustainability to that.
Yeah, and if you're feeling stressed because it's hard for you to experience that slowdown associated with heat, then you need to zoom way out in your training. Because if you're looking at your training to be a constant linear trajectory upwards at all times, every single day, getting faster, like if your ego can't tolerate unPRing something, then you need to zoom way the heck out.
Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about my upcoming like adventures, and I've been a little bit personally nervous about them because how hot it's been, and knowing that I tend to tell myself that I don't perform very well in the heat.
But like,
And
there's no like, rather other than like, someone looking at your DNA and being like, oh, you actually do have like some weird sweat limitation. Like, there aren't different kinds of people who are good at heat and bad at heat. There are people who put in the work and do it and like allow themselves to grow. And then there are people who tell themselves self-limiting stories about being good or bad at heat.
Yeah, Zoe, that's a great, that's like the logical mind, right? And then there's like my internal way of thinking, which is sometimes a little self-critical. And we've talked about, using these adverse opportunities to like build up our inner coach, and to support ourselves with, good inner dialogue and things like that, or with the logical kind of mind. Yeah, and I think that what I was going to say is I've already started to maybe adjust my expectations for those events just a little bit, knowing that the season, it's still early. There's nothing to prove. These races and all this is just about like having fun and celebrating the work that you're doing anyways. And I think for me that like really helps to take the pressure off of like wanting to do super well. And sometimes when I do that really well and I don't think about the outcomes, I end up doing great. Other times I think a lot about the outcomes and I end up doing poorly or great. It's a mixed bag. You never really know.
That kind of says a lot about just where you are mentally as a runner too, and how important the mental game is to everything. We talk about physiological adaptation and blood volume and plasma creation, like all the like science-based physiological things that are fact, like that your body is getting stronger. But at the same time, that mental game, it can definitely be a self-limiting factor regardless of what your body's doing to grow and succeed in your goals. But if your mind's telling you no, you're just making it harder on yourself. So giving yourself grace, like Zoe talked about, and understanding that things come with time and it's going to be hard, especially as the temperatures increase, and just kind of set the bar low, if you will. That's what I try to do.
Right? If you like adjust that expectation, you're like, I'm not expecting to like absolutely crush this thing. And then sometimes you end up surprising yourself, right? Like, especially if it's like a focused adventure race day, like all of a sudden you're tapered, you're feeling fresher, the legs are feeling lighter, you're like feeling a little less weight mentally because you've taken a little bit of extra rest going in. And all of a sudden, like the environmental factors that surround the event are really completely different than all of your long runs that were challenging or all of your workouts that were tough and in the heat. And then you tend to do really great as a result of that. So it is rather like a lot of things that kind of come together on race day to like allow yourself to have an effort that you feel like is good, or for you to push yourself and maybe grab a few PRs or something like that.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest points for improvement in most athletes' mental game is that misalignment of expectations and experience. Like, if you're going up a hill, even if you're doing just fine, if you have the perception that it's harder than it should be, it will feel harder and you will actually slow down as a consequence. But if you just say, yeah, hills are hard, they're going to feel hard, like, this is okay, I am expecting this, I am prepared for it, this is what I am here for, then it will not be as bad. It's typically that misalignment of expectations and then what actually happens that tends to trip people up. Like, especially in races, they think, oh, I should be going so much faster, I should be doing so much better. And as a consequence, that actually, they'll produce more cortisol, they will slow down, they will have their perceived effort will go way, way up, rather than just saying like, yeah, running 50 miles is hard, I expected this, and not applying that extra layer of self-judgment, which tends to slow people down.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, wow. We could really go on and on about this stuff, but maybe we should
answer a question.
Go into some of the questions that we have for today. Oh, I just want to talk about visualization.
Yeah, I just want to look at the picture of Virginia's dog. So
such a good smile.
Such a good smile. It looks so much like a person.
Cool. Yeah. Where to start? I don't even know, guys. We have so many good questions. Um, okay, how about we start with this? We had a question from an athlete who really likes to learn about each coach's background, and this has been on the sheet for the last 2 weeks, but we've kind of glossed over it to talk more about training topics. But this athlete is curious how the coaches got started with coaching. Maybe Drew, would you like to start?
Sure. In high school, I was coached by a University of Arkansas athlete who was being coached by Coach McDonald at the time, who, by all accounts, is the most successful coach in any sport in history, who just passed away recently, unfortunately. But I learned to do things as an athlete in high school the way that, this legendary college coach had his athletes do in college. And so just I was always interested and felt like I was just had like great mentoring and great coaching. And then when I got to college to run, I felt like the coaches were completely inexperienced. They had no clue what they were doing. And I was and still am kind of hard-headed, I guess, and I thought that I knew more than the coaches did. Classic 18, 19-year-old boy. And so it was one of those deals where the coaches were like, "Oh, you think you can do better? You coach." And I was like, "Oh shit, here we go." And so just started like writing plans for the college boys, and everyone loved it. And the coaches were so pissed off. They're like, "Well, Drew's, stop it. You don't know what you're doing." And then from that point on, everyone thought that I did know what I was doing. And so through a course of like writing plans and for friends and other athletes in college, regardless of sport, it's just through practice and practice and practice through the past. I mean, I'm 35, so it's been a while since I guess, started writing plans for people. And you learn as you go, just like all of us do. But that's kind of like my foray into how, like, quote unquote, coaching started, was just writing plans for people and keeping up with progress.
Yeah, awesome. Kristen?
Sorry, couldn't find the mute button. Yeah, I think I started pretty similarly to Drew. I went to the University of Oregon and was fortunate enough to be coached by Tom Heineman, who for years and years and years coached the women's varsity team at Oregon, and had this really cool training philosophy where it's like, it should be fun. It should always be fun. And just kind of seeing and being a product of that environment, it was really special and it was really cool. The relationship I had with Tom, like I still consider him like one of my best friends, and I trusted him, and I trust him so much that everything that he did made a really solid impact. And it was cool to watch other runners progress as well based off of the same sort of training mechanisms. And he was one of the first athletes to really test the Jack Daniels methods. And so it was cool digging in and asking him questions. He ran at Oregon with Steve Prefontaine. So it was cool to learn more about his history as an athlete, and then see and watch as he adapted that experience to each of the athletes that he currently coached. And since then it's been really cool just, watching the progress from an athlete who's beginning training to, that 500 day. Like, it's a crazy transition that happens. And after college, I started helping out some friends, who wanted to run a 10K or wanted to run a marathon or a half marathon, and kind of taking what I learned from Tom, and then doing my own research as well, diving into the Jack Daniels training book, into Hal Higdon. And fortunately for me, my job as a advertising agency copywriter, I was working at Nike at the time, and we put together training logs with Mo Farah and Shalane Flanagan as part of the sort of like Nike Plus Run Club. And so that really changed my perspective a lot too, because it you know, it's just everyone has a different process. Everyone has different ideas of what can make athletes better, faster, stronger. So it was cool to get these, like, you know, meet in person with these professional athletes and sit down and ask questions and say, why would you recommend this? Why is this like your go-to workout? How has it affected you? You know, and you're talking to freaking Shalane Flanagan or Mo Farah, and you're trying not to just like fangirl out. And I think it was those moments where I just knew, like, this is something that I want to do. This is something I'm interested in. This is a cool way to give back to my community. And I think once that like, it was just a simple project for work, you know, but like once it was over, it was like, I was hooked. I was all in. I just wanted to like help people. I wanted to apply these theories, like with myself and with athletes. And it's been such a wild ride. I love it.
Nice. Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got a little bit of a start when I was actually training with Drew back in Arkansas. The running store I worked at, and where Drew was my boss, we had a really amazing half marathon training group that people would sign up for every year. And it was like so popular that it would like, we would put the registration online and it would sell out in 11 minutes. Like people were so nuts for it. And so Saturday mornings, I would like ride up with Drew to Bentonville, and we would help people. Like it was kind of geared at people who wanted to run their first ever half marathon. And actually, as part of that training process, like I like secretly was like also training to run my first half marathon with them. So I was like coaching people and kind of training myself simultaneously. And like I remember as part of that process, I did my first ever like double-digit run, and it just was like one of the most empowering experiences of my life. And like just getting to be there with people that were like experiencing something really amazing for the first time. Like every Saturday there would be like the majority of the people in the program were running their furthest run ever. And I think anyone that's ever, like, we've all had that experience of like when you're really pushing into the unknown in a distance, and you know, whether that's 8 miles or like 100 miles, like it is a profound experience, like no matter what the distance is. And it was just so amazing to watch people tap into that part of themselves and like come together and really support each other. And it was so cool because Drew would just be like zooming around, like just talking to people, handing out gels. And I was like, this is such an amazing way to connect with people. Fast forward several years of pretty atrocious training on my part, I started working at Trail Runner magazine and just wanted to implement some of the stuff I was learning at Trail Runner. And I had been maybe dating TJ for like a year, and he had his own kind of like coaching. It wasn't a business yet. He just like was the guy that everyone in Aspen went to when they had like training questions. And so he had kind of started his thing because he was really curious about, and I mean, you'll hear more about this in a second, likely, but he was basically building this platform. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. It'd be really awesome if we could do it together. And so we did.
Yeah.
But I just kind of glommed onto his thing, to be clear.
That's not necessarily true. No,
it's absolutely
you did
true.
more than that.
I mean, you went and like made the LLC, you like, you know, formulated, like you built the thing. I was just like, sure, I'll, you know, like I want to help. Like I want to be a part of this.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I guess it's my turn to talk about my coaching start. I don't know. I've been a coach virtually since I was 18 years old, but I got my start actually in the tennis world. I played college tennis on a nationally ranked team, was a nationally ranked athlete. And that is really like my athletic history kind of started there. And throughout my kind of younger adult life, I was involved coaching the kind of junior national team in the Eastern States, the division, New York, New Jersey, Long Island, you know, like all of these Eastern states, all the best rising 14 to like 18-year-old players. And I worked in the development academy for those athletes. And yeah, I've been a coach like ever since then. Got so many certifications as a tennis player that I don't use
So if anyone wants tennis
anymore.
training,
If you need tennis lessons, you can call me.
too
Yeah,
bad we
but
can't do those online.
it's interesting. When I became a professional skier and really started to segue out of that business, I can't remember the last time I taught a tennis lesson. I taught a bunch in Argentina when I was living there, like 27 to 30 years old, right before Microcosm. But yeah, I mean, kind of, when I was living in Aspen and really competing a bunch, I had many, many people asking me for coaching advice, and I was applying some things that I learned as an integrative nutritionist and a health coach in the kind of coaching fundamentals. I was really kind of applying those things to running, and that's kind of where Microcosm got its start. That's where the philosophy about how to coach athletes comes from. I don't want to waste too much time talking about all of that, because we've actually done a few calls and things on that. But yeah, I mean, my start really with the running coaching was prescribing plans, weekly plans for athletes, friends of mine, that were really just, quite honestly, like training for their first trail marathons and trail ultras. And I realized kind of like when my plans were successful, like when those athletes had success, when they actually, like reached their desired times at those races, and I was there to kind of experience with those moments with them, like that was really, really powerful for me. And that's kind of where I started to realize, like, this is where I want my career direction to go. Yeah, and that's kind of where, Microcosm started. It was like at the restaurant I worked at, giving plans on cocktail napkins every single week to these athletes. And then eventually, I took that very like loose form of writing plans. It didn't have a lot of accountability, and shifted to the training logs, and have been mentored by David Roche since that exact time, like late 2017. Yeah, and here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, a short story, maybe it's actually a much larger tale of lots of ups and downs and challenges. But yeah, I think
liability insurance
and for employees, like / contractors now, and it's not just me, which is so cool and inspiring, that we can grow like that and support so many people, going from just a handful of athletes. I remember when I got my first 10 coaching clients, and like how big of a deal that was.
Oh my God. I remember when I got my first athlete, I was like texting her like twice a day. Just like, how do you feel? How's it going?
Right?
Like,
so
I only have one athlete. I'm going to check in with you like 3 times a day. I don't care that you're only running 3 miles. How was your sleep?
Oh, man.
You haven't checked in yet today. Is everything okay?
I sometimes revisit like my first training logs and look at, like my coaching and my builds and things from back then. And I still feel it was really solid coaching.
Yeah,
Those
but I mean, you learn
loved
and
it.
grow.
Yeah, totally.
Like there's
totally.
definitely some builds that I'm like, I wouldn't do that again.
My efficiencies are like much different now. Yeah, gosh, it's amazing to be, 3 years into this business, officially, because you have all that time leading up to it. And then, you finally have a business and you're like, okay, I better register with the IRS, like,
Adulting.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this isn't just like a hobby. This is an actual full-time job that you do 6 days a week for 3 years straight.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. Well, cool. Let's move on. I want to talk about training and not myself, because I don't love that.
Deep dive into the tax code.
If you'd like, we can talk about small business tax exemptions. Okay, hobbies. This is a great question. On last week's Coaching Corner, some coaches mentioned not getting in your own way of your potential. I love this message and understand that we shouldn't make excuses or put other things in our way that will restrict us from committing to our training. But with that said, I do also know that each of us also has other interests in a life outside of running. Where is the balance? How do you devote yourself to all your training and leave room for the effort you put into your loved ones, other hobbies, family? Um, yes, we'll leave it at that. It goes on. So basically, the gist of this question is, how do you balance your training, the goals that you have for yourself, with your other aspects of your life, right? Your other interests, your other passions.
Yeah, I love this question. It reminds me, I had an athlete ask me not too long ago in the log. She was like, I want to go all in. How do I go all in on training? And I was like, actually, don't go all in. Like, going all in, I think, is a road to burnout and or injury. I want my athletes to be like mostly in most of the time. It reminds me of a Ted Lasso quote. I want 60% effort 1000% of the time. Right? Because like if you can be like mostly present and do pretty okay for a really long time, like that athlete who trains, 60%, 1000% of the time is going to beat the athlete who trains at 1000%, 40% of the time, And I think that this balance looks different for everyone, but you want to avoid being too all in, because that is typically where you see people like they'll string together 9 months of really great training, they'll run a 100, and then they'll be like, actually, I hate running, I hate training, I've been low-key miserable, all of my joints hurt. And you're like, okay, like clearly, so don't go all in. Do not be all in. Anyone that tells you that you need to be all in is maybe has different life circumstances and or is a different person. All perspectives are valid, I guess. But I think that, it really comes to, and then on the other side of that, a lot of times we'll see athletes be like, well, what about my skiing? What about my mountain biking? And it's not that we don't want people to pursue those things, but at a certain point, if you are spending time and energy on something else, like you only have so much time and energy, and it's like, you only have so big of a pie, right? And there's nothing I can say as a coach that changes that fact. And that doesn't mean that you can't do those things. It just means that you are making a decision, and that just because a coach says it's okay doesn't mean you're not making a choice, or that in having a coach sign off on it, it changes the physiological facts of life. And so you just have to be conscientious, and you have to understand that you are making decisions in your life and in your training, and that that's okay, but we just have to be considerate about that fact.
I think that there's a few interesting things that you mentioned here, Zoe. I think one, you're kind of tiptoeing around like this idea that, we prioritize different parts of our life differently. And what I'm kind of hearing is that you don't have to have 100% of your prioritization on the training. In fact, that could be harmful. That could be really unhealthy, right? Like that could lead to over obsession, over identification, with your athletic self. And this is something that I think is really huge. I mean, you hear a lot of coaches talking about embrace your athletic self, embrace your athletic life. And I think that is all fine and good to a certain point. And that point being that you forget that running isn't all there is. Mm-hmm. And so cultivating other passions, hobbies, making sure that you spend time with family and loved ones, hitting kind of those other important things that exist in life is part of living, I think, a whole experience as a human. So, the idea of going like 60% in 1000% of the time or whatever is interesting, right? Like we want to be fully committed to our goals, because if we're not, it's going to be very hard to achieve some of these goals. Ultra running is hard. Marathon running is exceptionally hard. Like these things are not easy. So if we're not really committed to them, it's very easy to skip a workout. And then all of a sudden you get to race day and you've skipped a workout every single week. And that's not consistency. That's not going all in. In fact, that actually probably, to relate this to what Zoe said, isn't like going 60% like effort all the time. And so like what I think Zoe is really saying is that like you've got to show up every day for your training. And that if that's 1 hour a day, be present with that 1 hour a day. Don't feel like you need to be perfect, that you need to like run that like workout and execute it perfectly. Just be present with it and
Just
do your
show
best.
up.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need a perfect workout really ever.
Right.
I've maybe done like 2 workouts literally ever in my career that I was like, yeah, that was good. And all of that happened on purpose in the way I wanted it to,
Yeah.
like 1,000 fine workouts beat one great workout every time. Right. And I think that, the more that we can just get used to being like, okay, like if I can show up more days than not and do mostly okay, that's good enough. Like that, not only is it good enough, but I would argue that it will beat that athlete who like puts in 9 months of super hard work, burns out, and or gets injured.
Yeah. And I think it's, really another way of saying this is like, hold your training loosely.
Yeah.
You don't have to over grip it. You don't have to be a perfectionist. And when we kind of hold our training loosely, we make space for these other parts of ourselves that exist out there. For me, I really, really value my rest time. I really value my time with my family. I really, really value like time in the evening with Zoe, or time to explore like other passions that I have, other sports that I'm involved with, and creative activities. Like, in order to do all of those things in the course of a day, you have to hold your training very loosely. It's, if you're over obsessed about it, if you're that kind of person that has to do 2 extra miles and add them on to every run,
or if you feel guilty, like if your coach gives you a range and you feel guilty
about doing
them, but
yeah.
that's like, but it's part of the range, then like
Totally.
that's something that should be
Yeah,
addressed.
I think so too. And sometimes, it's knowing when to really prioritize the training, and then when you can kind of take a step back, maybe go on autopilot a little bit. Like, I'm just getting these runs done. I'm maintaining, I'm building a little bit. And then when you're, within that like 12-week period before an event, like you're really starting to like click in, you're thinking a lot about recovery, you're thinking more about sleep, and kind of oscillating a little bit sometimes in the year. And that's something that really works for me, especially is like I kind of bear down a little bit when I'm several months away from a big event, and I kind of loosen up a little bit more like in the winter and things like that. And knowing that, like, if it's the weekend and you want to spend time with your kids, but you've got to like do a run, it's, it's okay to do the lower range of the mileage or cut short. In fact, usually it's beneficial to make those tough decisions. One, because you're going to go and spend time with your family, you're going to go engage in other things, and you're going to have more energy for them. So you're going to enjoy it more. You're going to be less resentful around the training, and that makes the training more sustainable.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Drew or Kristen, what your guys' kind of experiences and your perspectives on this.
Something that I like or took from the question itself about the balance between devoting yourself to your training and then also leaving room to put effort into your loved ones. And not to segue too much, because I know we talk about like support systems and stuff like that, but for me personally, I know for a lot of others that have a spouse or partner, kids in the picture, that kind of stuff, it's so important to communicate effectively with the people around you, so that when you do go and spend the time running, like all of us are doing this because we're training for something, right? You can't just be like, well, I'll just half-ass it and then, eventually show up on race day and maybe I'll finish, maybe I won't. We'll just see what happens. That's not acceptable. And so kind of getting on the same page with the people around you, so that when you are committed and you are doing that 60%, 1,000% of the time kind of training, that everyone's on the same page, so that you're supported as much as you can, so that you can go run and you can spend that extra time doing what you need to do. My wife doesn't run, but she's supportive of my running. And so what it means for like this weekend, she's very pregnant at this point, where she's 8 months pregnant. And we have a little 2-year-old girl who is I thought I was high energy. She blows me out of the water. And so I just get nervous leaving my 2-year-old with my wife. But we talk about it. It's like, all right, I'm going to get started early. I'm only going to be gone an hour. And then when I get back, like I'll take the baby and then you can have some free time. But trying to balance my running, which is important to me and my mental health and my physical health, and then balance that with my family life too. It just takes communication, and that's it, I guess.
Yeah, Drew. And to me, I kind of hear that it takes effort, right? Like these
Yeah,
things don't just happen.
and effort, not just on your part, effort on, your partner's behalf as well.
Yeah, awesome. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything Drew said. I think everything usually boils down to like having a solid like just communicating really well, and managing expectations as well. So it's like if I mean, you have to like plan these things out sometimes. So it's like plan out the logistics, make sure everyone's cool with expectations, make sure everyone's communicating clearly. But I also think like there is something to say about like you can't pour from an empty cup, like kind of thing. And so if you're just like totally maxed out, helping other people all the time, you're not going to be able to give yourself, you're not going to be able to show up for yourself the way you should or the way you want to. So I think it's really important to almost take the time that you spend on your runs as like self-care. Like that can be wrapped up into self-care in a lot of ways, because if you're not doing that for yourself, it's hard to do that for other people.
Yeah, I totally, I can really relate to that, and definitely struggle with that in my own life in terms of how I feel that self-care element and that rest element is very important to me. Yet I never feel like I always feel like I could be doing more of that. And so sometimes, recognizing, I think for myself that like as a multifaceted person, you have, like I like the concept of the pie, right? You have like your business self, your running self, your like family self, your creative self, your continuing education self, your like you have all of these different parts, the other sports that you play, and then knowing like that there's a rest part of you too in there, that like you need to be fully recharged in order to do any of those other, engage in any of those other parts of yourself well at all. And sometimes, that I think for me that's a big challenge. Um, yeah, gosh, I love resting so much. I wish I could rest a lot more, quite honestly. But finding the balance in there is really key, right? So like if you're working with a partner, you have a family in mind, the communication element, I think that both you and Drew mentioned is obviously really, really key. And also, sometimes like I feel like, again, like being willing to do a little bit less and knowing that that's okay. Like that consistency element to your training and having that loose grip sometimes can be really helpful, because for a lot of people who struggle with taking rest, a lot of people who struggle with doing like the lower end of the volume, because that volume element like deeply connects with how you value yourself. And validate yourself as an athlete, that can be a really tough thing to work through. So I would say if that is a description of anybody on this call or listening, do the hard thing, run the low end of your prescribed volume as often as you feel like it's necessary in order to promote other aspects of your life, because in the future, looking forward, that's going to help you to kind of like not be so resentful of the training, have more time to be present in the other activities that you do. It's very important as an athlete that you don't live this like monk life existence. We've seen that celebrated with other professional athletes and runners out there.
It never works long term.
I don't prescribe to it. That is just like this cycle of I train for a race and then I don't do anything. I train for a race and then I don't do anything.
I think there's also a misperception. Like I get a lot of questions about like how elite athletes like eat or recover, and like as like athletes have run elite times, like we're not sitting around in squishy pants watching Netflix all day.
But and I want to.
We would love, that would be great. Actually,
I
would
want
not
to.
like that. Like, I do not want to live a life where I have to sideline my professional career and aspirations for the running. Like, that makes no sense to me. And, you know, like, you know, while we do like work with a nutritionist and like we do, you know, like really try to make sure that our eating supports our training, we don't like wake up and measure out, you know, like carbs and breakfast every, like, you know, clinging too tightly and getting too absorbed in the details isn't what supports success. It's actually learning to let go of things that don't serve you and focus on the things that matter to you and fulfill your value system and supports overall good health and well-being that tend to make better athletes. Like, you know, we're not training for the Olympic trials. Like, we don't need to, you know, like cling that tightly. And sometimes when I'll see athletes who, like, no matter what level they're at, get too absorbed in trying to align their lifestyle to that of what they perceive an elite athlete's lifestyle is, like, that's not healthy. Don't do that.
I think that that's a perfect last word, right? Like, we can be great at running, we can be great at these things, but we don't have to hold it too tightly. We don't have to be drawn into all the specifics all the time. All right, let's move on. We've got a question about heat training, the hot topic of the last 2 weeks. If I'm going out for a 4+ hour run and I start at 6 a.m., based on the forecast, it's going to be 85 degrees by about 8:30 or 9. It's going to keep getting hotter. Am I better off doing the full distance, but slowing down as needed, even if I need to walk? Or am I better off cutting it short? Zoe.
I would say it depends, but, you know, trying to get the full volume, but knowing when what you're doing is counterproductive. Like, you don't want to engage in counterproductive training. So I'd say if you're walking for like multiple minutes, like if you're able to do like a walk jog, even, that's probably okay and productive. But if you're, you know, if you're walking for like an hour, that's not very productive and you're better off resting, likely, because you're not reinforcing the biomechanical patterns that we want. And you might not even be, you know, doing the aerobic base building we want. I also don't know if this person's running on trail or walking. Like, do you want to just be walking around, like, you know, downtown Dallas with a running pack on for an hour? Unlikely. You know, but like if you're in the mountains, then like I would say in the context of that, walking makes a little more sense. I think, you know, it's really hard to answer things specifically, but a helpful heuristic in learning from this question, I think, is know when your training becomes unproductive and or counterproductive, and that's the point where you should call it a day.
Kristen, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think that there's definitely a point where if you're walking too much, like, you're not going to get the adaptations we're looking for. And I don't know, like, I've had an athlete who's broken up a long run into 3 separate runs. And I just remember being like, why, what are you doing? Like, you're not getting the adaptations you need from this. So it in that specific case, it would have been better to rest. So it is very individual and unique to the athlete.
You got time to take him out. He's been.
And I think
if not,
it just depends on how you're feeling that day, depends on what you're training for. But if you're walking a lot, especially, you know, like Zoe said, downtown Dallas, like, I wouldn't want to be in downtown Dallas with a running pack on ever. Because downtown Dallas in the summer sounds awful in itself. So, I mean, unless you're hiking and there's going to be a significant amount of hiking in your race that you're training for, it's a different story. But
Drew, what do you think?
Well, it's a little bit different for, I guess, marathon training, because you're really not out there for 4 hours. But if an athlete came to me with like the same issue, like it's the same. Like if you're melting and your quality is decreasing at an exponential rate, and you still got a lot of quantity left, I would tell, like, shut it down. Like, just survive, live to tell about it. We can do it again another time. But listen, like, if it's going to come down to you walking for an hour, like, just don't stop let's shut it down. I feel like that increases the risk of injury too, not just with like heat exhaustion, but over the course of, I mean, you walking, obviously you're slowing down, so you're covering less distance over time. And so if you're going out for like a long run, say it's like a 30-mile long run or whatever in preparation for 100, like you're going to be still taking in like your resources, your water and your nutrition and stuff like that, and you run the risk of just running out of that and really getting into a really dangerous place. And so I would absolutely 100% shut it down. Let's reconvene and figure something else out. But in that specific scenario, yeah, no more.
Yep, I would agree. I think that if your health is at risk, absolutely, it's very, very important to shut that run down. You know, I would say that depending on the race you're training for and the terrain that you're in, you know, and exactly what portions of that run you're walking, it could be advantageous to try to stay out there a little bit longer, as long as that run quality isn't dipping too much. And so specifically, you know, in the heat, power hike that extra hill. Like, don't worry, hike as much as you need. But if you're not running the downs anymore, if you're not shuffling the downs, if you're not, you know, shuffling the flats, then, you know, we're getting into that dangerous territory where, you know, this work probably isn't going to help you as much for race day. However, you know, I think that if you're still able to shuffle, if you're still able to run, you know, that maybe once in a training block, twice in a training block, if we're talking about 8 to 12 weeks leading up to a long ultra, yeah, maybe you need to stay out there a little bit, make sure you're eating. There's a lot of metabolic adaptation that's going to happen. If you give up on those runs right off the bat, I think you might be leaving some potential on the table, a little bit of fatigue resistance that we do need to build up in order to successfully complete these races. So make sure you're giving yourself some grace when you're going to make that decision, and you're not so beholden to like the distance that you have to go. Your health is always the priority. But if you're just giving up because you think you're going to be walking later, that's not acceptable. I think that you need to be out there and kind of seeing where it goes, being curious. Because if you don't go out and run for a while when it's 85 or 90, I'm sorry, but you're going to have a really, really hard time on race day completing your race, because it's going to be hot. Look, we've seen it. This summer is very warm. It's going to be 85 degrees when you're finishing your race. So if you don't practice in those temperatures, in that environment, you're going to be in for something very special on race day that you're not prepared for. And so I'm just giving you guys the other side of this, which is that you do need to train in the heat, and you do need to see and get curious of what you're capable of.
But like that would count as productive, right?
Yes.
So like what we're telling people to do is don't do things that are counterproductive, do things that are productive. Occasionally you're going to make the mistake and learn like, oh, that was counterproductive. We're like, oh no, I accidentally quit when that might have been productive. And like, that's okay. Start to learn where that difference between productive and counterproductive training is. And that's the reason that we have like a whole spectrum of answers here, is because this isn't a yes or no question. It's a question that helps everyone get better at working towards independence in their training.
Yeah. I really think that like if you're starting a run at 6 and like by 9 o'clock you are completely buckled over in the heat, exhausted, that, you know, you think you've done a 3-hour run. And so you can probably loosen your grip a little bit. And, you know, that is a proud effort, and you could head home, even if you've got a few extra miles on there. A couple other tips: if it's going to be hot, maybe run easier terrain. So you're not going to be out there on your feet for as long. So for a lot of athletes, that means less steep trails. That could be faster bike path and things like that. That's going to allow you to move a little bit more efficiently. And if you're nervous about these things, you know, make that decision on the fly. You don't always have to prioritize the terrain that you're running on race day, although it is helpful. Yeah. And it really just depends. You know, we have these conversations a lot, because we have a puppy that can't be left in the car for more than a few hours at a time while we're out running.
And
so
like
we
my
have to think
preference
about
would be
that all the
like
time.
giant mountain runs all the time,
Right.
but
The
that's not
reality is
the
that it
reality
doesn't
is,
work.
yeah.
So, you know, knowing that like,
Yeah,
you have
until
to
Bowie
change your
becomes a
plans.
mountain runner. She looks so nervous just hearing this conversation.
Let's
right now.
let's try to get one more question in. I think this is an important one that I really wanted to address today. And so it's how much consideration should we be giving to strength training? Should it be a 30-minute routine of legs, arms, core? How should we be tracking this? How often should we be doing it? Zoe, you're kind of a cross-train expert. Let's hear you. I want your answer.
I love moderate strength training. I would say, you know, I do strength training myself. I don't track it in my log because I don't, unless it meaningfully affects my training. Like I do it in a way that supports my running, but not to the point where it makes me sore or tired for my running. So I don't track it because like I know my coach, I know how we communicate. I know that it's not important for him to know that I did my normal strength training and it didn't meaningfully affect the running. You know, I understand that like for some other people, if they're looking to have, and like I hire a strength training coach and I track my strength training with her because that is her job. That is what I pay her to do. Shout out to Emily Holmes. Everyone should check her out. If you are really interested in strength training, connect with someone like Emily, because not only does she build a training log specifically for your strength training, she helps hold you accountable. She gives you a space to do that. She gives you feedback on your strength training, and she builds a plan that is specifically aimed at supporting your running. And this isn't just an advertisement for Emily's services. This is to say that the best strength training is the strength training that supports your running without making you sore or tired in a way that detracts from your running.
Oh, I like that.
Less is more for strength training, honestly. Like, you know, you'll see a lot of people on the internet who say you need to be doing a lot of strength training, and I can guarantee you they're all selling you a strength training program.
Yeah.
Like that's just what it is. And like different things work for different people, but less is more. If you're doing so much that it makes you sore or makes it hard for you to go out and do the running, or that you're doing it, like if you're choosing between the strength and the running needs to come first. The running is the priority. No amount of strength training, there's no strength training regimen or routine that's going to make you a rock star runner if your running isn't dialed and on point.
Drew, I've seen some of your marathon training plans and I've been really like stoked on those. And I know I asked you some specific questions about the strength that you ask your runners to do. What does this look like from a marathon running perspective in your mind?
Generally speaking, and not just for marathon running, but I really like to start athletes off in like a strength phase, and that, or like in their base phase, I guess I should say, when we're increasing mileage to whatever like our peak mileage is going to be. I like for athletes either 2 or 3 days to incorporate some calisthenics or plyometrics, just usually after the run, but it's really basic. It's like 20 to 30 reps of like squats or lunges and like planks and stuff like that. So it's more like core based. And what I found is a lot of that just helps to decrease the chances of core related injuries later in the training cycle when you start to increase intensity, when you start to increase, I mean, like the hill repeats, for example, like if you've got a strong, you know, like your glutes are strong and developed, then when you start using them more for other workouts, you have less chance to develop like IT band syndrome. And so I usually kind of like try to develop those like healthy habits as they pertain to like really easy, I guess, calisthenics post run, so that when we kind of take off and I'm not keeping up with them in logs, that my athletes understand like this was important and this is why I did that, and I can continue on my own if I feel like I need it. But just like almost like an introduction. Like I'm not a strength coach. Emily's a strength coach. I just try to introduce like healthy core strengthening habits for athletes.
Yeah, awesome. Kristen, what do you think? What do you think?
I agree. I work with a friend, Ellen, out of Boulder, who is a strength coach. And her and I have been working together for the last 3 years. And it's very similar to what Zoe explained, where nothing that I do affects my running. And if I think it's going to, I skip that. that exercise. So I mean, a lot of it, it's body weight, it's band work, it's lunges, it's leg swings, squats, you know, push-ups, pull-ups with band support because I have zero upper body strength. And yeah, I mean, everything boils down to communication, you know? So when I talk to Ellen and I say, hey, I have a big workout coming up, or I have a big race coming up, these are my goals. She structures the strength training to meet those goals without putting me in a situation where I could possibly get injured, without putting me in a situation where I'm going to be sore, tired before a workout. And I know that a lot of times, like, running will always come first. Like, I always put the running workout ahead of the strength training workout. And so if I do a speed workout on a Wednesday and, you know, decide to go to the gym and do whatever Ellen has me do Wednesday night, that's going to give my body more time to adapt and recover before the next hard workout. So just having that open line of communication, and just, I'm not afraid to tell Ellen, like, this sucks. I hated this. I was so sore. And that's why I pay her. That's why we work together, you know? So I think that's really important to be able to communicate that way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You don't need abs to be a runner, by the way.
Exactly.
You need a functional core.
You need a functional core, but abs is not the same thing as a functional core. And anyone that tells you different is selling you something.
Yeah. I would recommend for athletes that you just find a routine that works well for you. You know, my routine is band exercises to warm up before my runs, and very light strength 2 days a week after. And that's mostly reverse lunges, step ups, and single leg deadlifts. Doesn't have to be very complicated. If you're not doing those things a few days a week, would definitely recommend that you do check out David Roche mountain and speed legs. Very easy to achieve and to complete workouts. Like, that's the perfect place to start. Doing some planks and push-ups, and then, you know, take that and then go to Emily or the Cairo Lab or something like that to really get that next level of strength work. Because yes, that having good strength affects your economy. It affects your durability as an athlete, as well as Drew, you know, mentioned, you know, preventing overuse injury and stuff like that.
But doing too much will negatively affect your economy.
It can, as Kristen mentioned as well, and as you mentioned. So
work with an expert.
Keep it light. Work with an expert.
Work with an expert. We have a blog post on this online.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're going camping. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I know we will. Get some adventures in.
Yeah.
Stay hydrated. Enjoy the heat.
Stay hydrated, boys.
See you on Monday. Bye.
Bye.